Spring comes to the Arctic late and rapidly, and all life forms must lay their eggs, grow their shoots, have their young in a hurry before the very short summer. Ice goes out of the rivers with a great rush, and they become almost impassable. Of course, it's a great event, and the Eskimo people like to come down to the rivers and watch the ice go out. And they sit there giggling and laughing and often having picnics. To get across is really hazardous. In this particular case, the river flows at the rate of 12 knots an hour. Spring also is a time of rapid temperature change. On these branches you'll see a gossamer fiber blowing in the wind, and this is the basis of the project. These Eskimo women are learning to spin and knit products from that gossamer fiber, which is called kiviut. Kiviut is the underwool of the domestic muskox. For millennia, the kiviut caught on branches and blew in the wind as the animals shed each spring their underwool, and they would scratch it off on rocks or any other projecting piece of branch, and birds would use it for nesting, but the great majority of it just blew in the wind and covered the landscape. This is a farm in which domestic musk oxen caught wild in the Arctic have been brought. And this is how the kiviut is taken from them. They are placed in a stall and the wool is pulled off. Kiviut is half the diameter of either vicuña or cashmere and is regarded as the world's finest natural fiber. And these Eskimo women, when they learn how to knit products, very fine, luxurious products from the kiviut, will have a source of income. It is most important that they be able to use their own natural resources and to derive a cash income through the manufacture of goods within the Arctic. And this is how tame the domestic muskox caught in the wild can become with proper management. An unimaginative geographer named these the Twin Peaks, and in front of them you'll see a muskox bull, a formidable animal which was once roaming the landscape of the Ice Age and was depicted in the caves of France and northern Spain. They are extinct in all of Eurasia now in the wild form and exist only in North America, the Canadian Arctic Islands, and in northern Greenland. The muskox weighs about 900 pounds if he's a bull, and about 600 to 700 pounds as a cow. The cow is rubbing her horns as a threat gesture. There's a calf in the middle and another cow beyond her. This first expedition was to northeast Greenland and started in Tromsø in North Norway, the so-called Arctic capital. Our ship was the Harmony, a 148-foot sealer, and we set off at midnight at the beginning of August. The light is still in the sky because we're well above the Arctic Circle. Tromsø is the home of most of Norway's sealers and whalers. Our route was to take us across the North Norwegian Sea to the coast of Greenland. This is the unfamiliar and least inhabited part of Greenland. In fact, one should say uninhabited except for a few weather stations. That particular summer, there was a 200-mile wide belt of drift ice along the coast of Greenland, and 15 ships were already stuck in that ice and were drifting with it south along the coast, hoping to get free as the ice turned the corner at the southern tip. On the way, of course, my crew of capturers was making preparations for our hoped-for collection of calves. Our goal was to have 10 males and 15 females. That would be the ideal sex proportion. As long as we were in the open sea, the voyage was beautiful. Calm waters, fulmar petrels, an occasional sighting of a whale. The sun never set. It just gets low to the horizon the further north one gets. Our ship was named the Harmony, and it had been used for several summers and several springs in the eastern ice. As we came to the ice, a fog belt spread over the whole seascape, and we had to go by direct navigation. The problem, of course, was to punch our way through this 200-mile belt to get to the coast. Our boat, the Harmony, was not an icebreaker, and so the way one got past the ice was to push one cake out of the way, back up and go around it, push another cake out of the way, and so on. A long and laborious task. You can see that the boat jolted the ice cake, forcing the seal to go into the water. That's a petrel. When we came close to Greenland, this was the dawn. A marvelous sight. There's the coast of Greenland in the distance. The last Eskimos who lived here had come around the northern tip of Greenland hunting the wild muskox, but then they killed off all, and both the animals and the people disappeared. However, there were enough muskoxen left to replenish their own stock. We're now entering Franz Josef Fjord, and in the background are icebergs, which of course come from glaciers only. One can get an idea of the size of some of these icebergs, which, were they to collapse on the ship, would swamp it. This is one of the typical glaciers of the area. Lacking trees, it's very difficult to get an idea of distance or size. Perspective is completely lost. We finally found a good moorage at the end of Muskox Fjord and started our hunts from that place. In August, there are still signs of summer and the summer vegetation. The cliffs in this area run from 5,000 to 6,000 feet, and in the foreground, you see the skeletons of some musk oxen that had been shot back in the 1920s by some sealers who were trying to capture calves by killing all the adults and taking the calves as they stayed close to the mother's carcass. We never kill or injure any of the animals, adult or calves. One of our principal tools is the helicopter, and we brought it along with us on the ship and brought it ashore to be properly assembled. Our pilots are two men from Sweden who were highly skilled and extremely enthusiastic about the task in front of them. The task included having to fly very close to the cliffs, a matter of 5 and 6 feet from the tips of the props, a most dangerous type of flying, especially because of the up and down drafts. So now we're off on a hunt to see if we can find a herd of musk oxen and hopefully a calf in it. The great advantage of the helicopter, of course, is that one can go out to a radius from the ship of about 50 miles on the hunts and can therefore have a much better chance of finding a herd. Although the ground looks barren, it actually is covered with vegetation, and there's plenty for the musk oxen to eat. This animal, for thousands upon thousands of years, has lived in the far north and in tundra environments in front of the great ice sheets which used to cover Europe and North America. It can dig through the snow for its food, and of course needs no shelter. Nature has endowed it not only with that heavy outer coat which you see here, but also with a thick blanket of kiviut, which is the product we're ultimately hoping to utilize. This is a men's club, a herd of 6 bulls. They are the losers in the battle for the favors of the cows and the herds, and they band together and spend most of their lives as a herd that was purely bulls. And here we have a group of 4, 3 cows and a calf. And the object will be to try to get that calf away from its mother. They are afraid of the downdraft of the helicopter's props. At this stage, when we picked out a calf, we immediately regard it as a patient and are carefully watching the color of its tongue to be sure that it doesn't become exhausted. Were the tongue to get too white, we would break off the chase. One can see the problem. The calf sticks so close to the mother that it would be almost impossible to get it away. And of course, the mother would attack anybody who came right up to her. And her horns are very sharp. At this point, the only effective system is to get out on the land on foot and somehow try to split the cow and the calf. Actually, a cow and a calf together are the worst possible combination. it's much better to try to get the calf away from a large herd. And here we have succeeded in splitting the calf off, and it's running across the tundra, and I'm chasing him. Somehow or other, musk oxen have the idea that the only way to escape is to run around you, even though there's the entire expanse of Greenland behind it to escape in. The musk ox thinks it must go past me. And here you have the instinctive short bluff charge, even though it's only a calf. One talks to it. And that's one way to catch them. This little fellow weighs about 160 pounds. The pilot's first task after capturing a calf is to bring pails of water to cool it down. The musk ox has no sweat glands and can easily become overheated, so we do our very best to drop its temperature right away. Then we give it a shot of penicillin and another shot of azithromycin in order to prevent any possibilities of respiratory diseases due to the shock, either of capture or of transportation. This method of pouring the water on the calf to drop its temperature has proved successful in every case. After being hog-tied, the calf is placed on a mattress on one of the pontoons and tied very securely. And then, of course, flown back to our ship. In this particular case, the ship was serving as a floating barn. Those are the men waiting for the calf to come in by helicopter. Great elation at the arrival of this calf, because just before our expedition left Norway, an old Norwegian polar expert had stated that it would be impossible for us to catch any calves without killing the adults. And of course, as one just saw, we can do it without killing. The name musk ox is a complete misnomer since the animal has no musk and isn't an ox. A much better name for them is the Eskimo word umingmak, which means the bearded one. There are ones found throughout this entire circumpolar zone of North America and Eurasia. But they are extinct in Eurasia because their typical defense is to form a circle and face their attackers. This made it very easy for primitive men with spears or bows and arrows to come up to a herd and shower it with weapons and kill the entire herd. Here the bull drops off first, then we get in close and try to split off the calf. In this particular case, I'm using hypnotism and talking to the calf saying, your eyelids are getting heavy, you're drowsy, and so on. You'll also notice that the calf is much, much bigger. The big question, of course, when you see something like this, is who's caught whom? The hold of the ship became an ideal barn. When the animals are brought back, they're first dried out thoroughly with cloths and regarded by all the members still as patients. Then a collar and tag is placed on its neck, and it's chained to its position in the wall. Red tags are for males, and blue tags are for females. It so happened that we were able to catch the full complement of 25 calves, exactly in the proportions we wished, 10 males, 15 females. To do that, we caught approximately 40 animals. And then we left the coast of Greenland because the weather was collapsing, and we were very much afraid of getting stuck in the drift ice. And this, of course, not only is important to keep the animal going, but is your greatest taming device. You're feeding him milk from a can. And as you can see, it doesn't take very long for the young animals to become tame enough to drink from the can and to follow one all around. In fact, to crowd in. Our route back led first of all through the drift ice, then across the North Norwegian Sea again in very rough weather. And here the helicopter pilots are putting the proper trophies on their pontoons. We came into a village in North Norway in which all the townspeople had come out to greet us with an umpapa band and great curiosity because none of them had ever previously seen a musk ox. The traditional Norwegian giving of flowers on any occasion. By this time, we had placed the animals in a crate, and they were taken off the ship and placed in a truck for the journey up to the farm which we had designated. The truck got stuck on the hill and had to be pulled by a tractor, but the townspeople all swarmed in spite of the considerable distance to the farm to watch the unloading. Now it must be realized that these little animals have never seen a fence in their lives, only a willow thicket at most, and so they're going to have to go through 3 or 4 bounces before they find out about it. That's 3. And there's the 4th. And that's usually enough to teach them for the rest of their lives, and one can keep them in the lightest chicken wire after that. They must also test it once at least as a herd. But now, 20 minutes later, they are peacefully grazing and remember where the milk came from. This is a quasi-defensive herd that you saw them in. And these animals will grow, have young of their own, be tame, ride on sleighs, play ball, but most of all produce annually the valuable kiviut, the underwool. This is another expedition to accomplish the same goals, this time to Ellesmere Island, on that part of Ellesmere Island called Fosheim Peninsula in the high Canadian Arctic. We had an assistance on this trip from the Canadian Coast Guard to get our expedition to the north, starting from Resolute Bay. The personnel on this expedition was very much the same as on the previous one to Greenland. This is the flag of our Institute of Northern Agricultural Research, which is responsible for the whole project. And these are the various members of the capturing party. The John A. MacDonald is the world's largest icebreaker. The normal use of the helicopters is to find passages through the ice on the trip north, which had to be along a very circuitous route because of heavy ice packing between these narrow channels. It's a trip of several hundred miles. As if the ice weren't enough of a problem, where it is open, one often encounters fierce storms, especially at that time of the year. We're now going up the channel between Axel Heiberg and Ellesmere, the scene of many early Arctic expeditions which took actually 300 years to penetrate this far north from Davis Strait. When looking at drift ice, it seems thin, but actually one should remember that only 1/10 of the ice approximately stays above the water. And so much of this ice is 10 or 12 feet deep. The basic reason for the project and its underlying argument is that man must learn to make a wider use of organic resources within their natural environment. This means, of course, domesticating animals and plants which are natural to a region, and therefore, with man's exploitation, will corrupt the natural surroundings as little as possible. The two large animals offered by the Arctic are the reindeer or caribou and the musk ox. The reindeer have been domesticated about 4,000 years ago by Eurasian Arctic. We've been talking about domesticating the musk ox for the last 200 years since they first encountered its kivyu blowing on bushes in the tundra around Hudson's Bay. But although they had talked about it, no one had done anything about it. And so that was our challenge. The other objective of the project is to show the people of the far north, often desperately poor, that it's possible to utilize their own natural resources, in this case grass, to put that grass through a converter, the musk ox, and provide a local industry and employment. The history of Arctic resources has usually been that southern nations take away the raw resource and do all the manufacturing in the south. Our objective from the start has been to create an industry in the north itself, in the villages, and to have as much as possible of the cash and the income accruing to the native people. This is Eureka, a weather station on Fosheim Peninsula, which will serve as our headquarters for the expedition. In three measurable waves about 500 years apart, Eskimos crossed the Canadian Arctic islands from Alaska, hunting musk oxen almost exclusively, and they passed right through this weather station at Eureka, and their ancient villages can still be found along the coast of Slidre Fjord. But of course no Eskimos live there anymore. An expedition of this sort is unusual in that we are bringing animal feed into the high Arctic because, of course, there is nothing locally available with which to feed the animals if they are caught. That's a skua, a gull which has specialized as a predator and feeds on the eggs and young of other seagulls. And of course we used helicopters to seek out the herds and to carry the animals back into our camp. In this particular case, our own helicopter crashed and was wiped out completely, and we were forced to utilize the helicopters from the icebreaker. These are skulls gathered from around the ancient Eskimo camps. When we were utilizing the helicopters which belonged to the Coast Guard, the pilots had never before been on an expedition of this nature and were accustomed to flying rather high according to our standards, 1,000 feet or more above the terrain. One must remember that we go right up close to cliffs and we're right down close to the ground as we try to drive the herds into suitable locations for capture or to closely examine the calves to be sure that they are in condition to be captured. Once again, the landscape appears to have practically no vegetation upon which a herbivorous animal could live. But naturally, there is ample vegetation for rather large herds. About 50 miles out from our ship, we found a herd of musk oxen on what appears to be a gravel plain. The landscape reminds one greatly of the paintings, the imaginations of how the landscape looked immediately after the Ice Age. Here we have a herd that has some calves in it. We're trying to push them towards a gully and trying as well to split off as many of the adult animals as possible. Two bulls certainly not wanted in the capturing procedure. We've driven them into a gully, and now my intention is to rope the calf and try to drive the other animals away, which has just happened. I've roped the calf, but the other animals are unwilling to leave. This is a really tricky situation, but with a lot of expletives and strange anti-muskox words, away they go. And we have a calf at the end of the rope, and we tackle him. The preliminary literature about the muskox was mostly mythical. In fact, it was once called the world's most dangerous game animal, which it surely isn't. It must be the world's least dangerous game animal. And it was also stated that even if one were able to capture the calves, they could not be tamed or domesticated. However, as one has already seen from the fast taming with milk, they are very amenable to domestic life. We define domestication as a process in which man is completely in control of the breeding and breeds his animals to perfect one or another trait which is useful to him economically. In this sense, a domestic animal is the creation of man through selective breeding. We breed for rapid growth, early maturity, and of course, kiviute yield. Here, once again, you see our procedure of cooling the animal down. It has two vestigial sweat glands, but they're both located in the hind feet and are nearly useless. And just as in a dog, it cools down by panting, but we never take a chance that it can cool down by itself, and we drop its temperature back to normal as rapidly as possible through this rather simple method. The herd normally moves about 1 mile off from the scene of capture and waits for the calf to return. If it is of the wrong sex, we let it go, and it takes a circuitous course, usually in the form of a crescent, and goes directly to the herd. This has mystified us many a time because we were completely unaware of how the calf knew in which direction to run. We always, after we have captured a calf and let it go for being the wrong sex, check to make certain that it did get back to the herd. If we take a calf from a cow, she will then come into heat again at the end of August or early September and be bred once more. In a normal state of affairs, the calf suckles its mother for the first 2 years, that is, over the first winter, and she will not come into heat, nor will she be bred. So a calf cycle in a very productive female at best would be once every 2 years in the wild. Under domestic conditions, we wean the calf in August of its first year, and the mother is rebred. Therefore, we have production approximately the same as in domestic cattle. The process is the same. The greatest possible care is taken of the animal. It's regarded and spoken of as a patient at first. And we have had the great fortune, after dozens and dozens of captures, of never having lost one in transit. And so, day after day, we go out on the hunts, often having to go further and further afield to find herds with calves. And great elation when one sees the bundle on the pontoon as it approaches. One often thinks of how surprised the Eskimos of 1,000 years ago would have been had they encountered this scene on their beaches. This time their barn is an abandoned shed. These particular calves are all in the 200-pound category. And sometimes they're rather reluctant to learn their first drinking lesson. One of the most striking features of the musk ox is its intelligence. Seemingly only 1 or 2 lessons are needed for almost any task. And on the farm, one finds them opening gates, opening doors with their noses, very playful and also very affectionate. It's odd indeed to have a huge animal, 800 and 900 pounds, come up and lean against you wanting to be scratched. In this regard, they're very different from cattle. The musk ox has no living relatives. The other species of musk oxen all became extinct in the late Pliocene and early Pleistocene periods of history. It therefore cannot be crossbred with any other animal. The normal lifespan is probably in the wild only 12 to 15 years. But we have records of one cow who lived for 23 and a half years. The wool is so valuable, the kiviot, that no one would ever kill a musk ox for its meat. The annual present cash value through the final creation of the products from one animal will run close to $4,000. The meat at best would be worth $60 to $70. And if the animal lives under domestic conditions for about 20 years, obviously one would never use it for other than its wool. This snow explodes and is an Arctic hare, surprising to many people because they run on their hind legs as well as on all fours. And indeed, this particular scene might make a most worthy opening scene for a final film, since the hare leads one directly into a herd of musk oxen. On this expedition, exactly as upon the Northeast Greenland expedition, the last animal was caught just as the weather collapsed for the autumn and winter, and snow covered the landscape. When one looks at a large herd of musk oxen such as this, with the many tons of muscle and glistening horns, one often wonders if it will be possible at all to get a calf from it. Here we have a bull on the left and a calf, and our objective is to capture them entirely by foot. And to drive the rest of the herd away. Musk oxen are extremely protective of their young, and if one were to shoot an animal in a herd, as in the old days people were wont to do, the rest of the herd will often stand around for hours protecting the body of their fallen comrade. But for some mysterious reason, the bull seems to understand that our objective is to capture the calf, not him. And so he's trying to drive the calf away. Meanwhile, we're trying to get the two of them to walk slowly up a gully into a position where a capture might be possible by rope. At the same time, we're trying to keep the animals from any undue nervousness that would lead to a health condition. But the bull is not cooperating. He's telling the calf to vamoose and to leave him alone. Sticking out on his neck, one could see some of the unshed pieces of kiviut. They're now approaching the mouth of a shallow gully, and we want them to go much further up. The sides of this gully consist of loose clay mud. And of course, one is very keen not to slide down in the mud. The object here is merely to drive them further and further up the gully. And the bull really knows that it's the calf we're after now. The Eskimos of Etah in northwest Greenland once believed that man descended from musk oxen. And that people could talk to them and that they would understand. Perhaps the bull has heard us talking about the calf, where our object is to catch one more female. You can see the bull trying to withdraw and the calf trying to follow him, much to his annoyance. Not much of a capture site for this, probably the most dangerous of all attempted captures because of that bull. It would be terrible to catch him by rope. One would have almost impossible task to get the rope off him. On the other hand, if one catches the calf and the rope meanwhile gets tangled up in the bull, there could also be a catastrophe. So my object now is not to rope so much as to push them into a better and better position. It's and so at last we rope him. Now the calf roped, how to get rid of the bull. The obvious method, pelt him with mud cakes, and he wanted to get away anyhow. So it all worked out very well. Those are not rocks, those are pieces of mud. This is a husky calf. And the bull just looks back and then takes off to save his own soul. Unfortunately, however, this was not a female, a male, and so he butted us a few times and we let him go. And so our full complement of calves were captured on this expedition and flown by plane the many hundreds of miles south to their experimental farm. And on this farm, musk oxen are growing, having their calves, and providing an industry for people, now employing 219 families who derive the majority of their annual income from knitting delicate products such as shawls, caps, tunics, mantillas. All of the adults are dehorned, not against men, but against each other when they run the risks of gouging one another close to feed troughs. And this peaceful scene of mother and calf can be followed at our farm with interviews and many, many feet of film of the development of the project. Thank you.